So we have been reviewing sequence in both fiction and nonfiction texts. And I'm going to go through the steps to identifying how to find sequence clue words to best support you in understanding the text you're reading. So to review, sequence is the order of events in a story or process. Knowing the sequence of events will help you understand what you read. We're going to read this passage about Amelia Earhart. This passage is about a pilot who flew airplanes many years ago. I'm going to read the first paragraph out loud, and then we're going to identify clue words in the paragraph that best help us understand sequence. Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart is one of the most famous pilots in history. She was born in 1897. Amelia's parents did not want her to fly airplanes, but Amelia had a dream. When she was in her 20s, she became a pilot. Then in 1922, Amelia bought her first plane. So if we go back, we can find clue words to help us keep track of the sequence of events. I read that Amelia was born in 1897. That's the first event. Mark it right there, 1897. What is the next important event? Well, the next important event in this passage was that in her 20s, she became a pilot. And finally, we have another year of 1922 when she bought her first plane. So if I was completing a flow map for Amelia Earhart, I would probably start with first. In 1897, Amelia Earhart was born. When she was in her 20s, she became a pilot. In 1922, Amelia bought her first plane. We can also notice that the word then is here. Then, next, first, last, finally are all important sequence words to look out for. But even if they're not there, you can also find other ways to know what happens next in the story. So we're going to read the next paragraph, and I'm going to give you a couple seconds to see if you can identify any sequence words after I read them. In 1928, Amelia Earhart became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, but she was not the pilot. She was a passenger. Amelia wanted to become famous for actually flying an airplane, so she decided to plan another flight. This time, she would fly around the world. In 1937, Amelia started her journey. She flew more than 22,000 miles before her plane disappeared over the Pacific Ocean. The plane was never found. When people heard the news, they were sad. Amelia was not able to finish her journey, but she inspired many others to follow their dreams. So in this passage, I'm going to give you a moment to see if you can find any clue words. Okay, did you find the year 1928? When she became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean? Did you also find the year 1937 when she started her journey around the world? Those are two great examples of using years to help you with sequence. I could also say, first Amelia Earhart became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. Then Amelia started her journey. Years, words are all clues for sequence. So we're going to go and we're going to do a activity together. So I'm going to get that ready for you guys, and we're going to be reading about another very famous pilot. So here is our passage, Meet Bessie Coleman. And we're going to do the exact same thing that we did with Amelia Earhart, but this time we're going to be looking at Bessie Coleman. Okay. So here's our passage for Meet Bessie Coleman. We're going to be doing the exact same thing we did for Amelia Earhart, but this time we're going to identify the sequence words that help us know what this passage is about. So Meet Bessie Coleman. I'm going to read the first paragraph. I'm going to stop and I'm going to identify those sequence words. Bessie Coleman was the first female African-American pilot. She overcame many difficulties in her journey to learn how to fly. She could not find anyone in the United States who would teach her to fly, so she decided to go to France. Now, even though it does say that she's the first female African-American pilot, that's a fact. That is not anything having to do with the sequence of the story, so we're going to continue to see if we can find sequence. Bessie knew she would need to speak a different language to communicate, so she took French lessons. Then in 1920, she traveled to France. She trained to be a pilot for 7 months. Finally, she earned her pilot's license. Now here my mind is going crazy because I see a whole bunch of sequence words that are important. So I found that in 1920, she traveled to France. She also trained to be a pilot for 7 months. And here's one of our words. Finally, she earned her pilot's license. We also know so could help us as a cause and effect word. So because of this, this happened. So we may need to look at her taking French lessons as an important event in this story. Otherwise, when she went to France, she probably couldn't have trained to be a pilot if she didn't speak the language. Let's continue. Once she returned home to the United States, Bessie needed to raise money to buy a plane. Bessie became a stunt flyer. She entertained people at air shows for 5 years. During shows, she performed tricks with her airplane. People called her Queen Bess. She also gave lectures to earn money. Soon, Bessie had enough money to buy an airplane. Today, Bessie Coleman is considered a hero. So I also found other things that were important in our sequence. So once she returned home, to the United States, she needed to raise money. So she became a stunt flyer. She did that for 5 years. Soon, she had enough money to buy her airplane. So I found a few more events in that story that I know are important to where she ended up in her life. So what we're going to do is now, we're going to look at the other side, and here is a version of our flow map. So what was the first event that we noticed that was important to her becoming a pilot and fulfilling her dream? Well, we talked about that first, was that in order to take her flying lessons, she needed to learn French. So Bessie learned French, and then in 1920, she traveled to France and she trained to be a pilot. So after she learned French, she trained to be a pilot. Now the question is, did she succeed or not? Well, we read, finally, she earned her pilot's license. So that finally tells us, this is what happened after her hard work to train to be a pilot, is that Bessie earned her pilot's license. But she had to do something before she started flying, and that was to raise money to buy an airplane. So we need to know, okay, how did she raise money to buy an airplane? And we know that once she returned home, she needed to raise the money, and for 5 years, she became a stunt flyer. So Bessie raised money by being a stunt flyer. And finally, after all those 5 years, we have the sequence word soon. Bessie raised enough money, and Bessie bought her own airplane. And this is the entire story. This is everything you need to know about Bessie Coleman. Understanding those sequence words are going to make it a lot easier for when you complete things on your own. because you are going to be completing things on your own. You're going to be completing the surprise party. Now, this is a fiction. Nothing is different between fiction and nonfiction. I even see, without even reading the story, a sequence word right there. The next day. That tells me something's going to happen. So this will be your responsibility to complete, and then we're going to go over it together. I hoped our practice helped, and let me know, as always, if you have any questions.